A question worth asking. What if Ukraine has already won the war against Russia, and Putin simply hasn't come to terms with it yet? The question may seem absurd, as the Russian president continues sending his soldiers to be slaughtered in Ukraine. Yet, it is far less crazy than it appears. The reality is that the balance of power on the ground is shifting, and that gives Ukraine the most concrete opportunity it has ever had to bring the conflict to an end. Putin now has only two options left, and both end in his defeat. We'll reveal what those are shortly. But first, Russia is running into serious obstacles on the ground as it attempts to push forward a spring offensive that was supposed to deliver the Donbas to Putin. Spring is well underway, and that should theoretically favor Russia. The ground dries out with the sun, spring foliage provides natural cover, and all the elements that complicate military advances during winter gradually fade away. Putin's plan, as has been the case in recent years, was to launch a spring offensive that would stretch into the summer and fall, with the ultimate goal of permanently collapsing Ukraine's defenses in the Donbas. And if Russia managed to push deeper into the Kherson and Zaporizhia oblasts, perhaps even reaching Zaporizhia city along the way, so much the better. Putin's troubles began with his inability to adapt. The same grinding offensive we have been watching for over 4 years is all Putin has in his arsenal. The spring offensive has suffered badly for that rigidity. The first signs that spring would not go Russia's way appeared very early on. The first week or so of Russia's renewed push resulted in 10,000 casualties, according to the national interest. Among them, a record-breaking day on March 17th, during which Russia lost 1,710 soldiers, the highest single-day figure of 2026 so far.
A few months after that chaotic start, we can officially say that the spring offensive is a resounding failure, pushing Putin ever closer to having to make one of two choices that both lead to Russian defeat. The fall of the Donbas is no closer today than it was at the start of spring. Russian forces are simply crashing against the Donetsk fortress belt, when they manage to reach it at all, and are dying before making any significant dent. The sad spectacle of the May 9th Victory Day parade perfectly illustrated this, as a gloomy-looking Putin watched an entirely unremarkable display unfold in Moscow. What was meant to be a show of Russian military power turned into a pitiful exercise revealing Putin's weakness, with Russia choosing not to display any of its military hardware out of fear of a Ukrainian strike. The parade amounted to nothing more than a monument to Russian failure. And on the ground, the evidence is piling up that the spring is not unfolding anywhere near how Putin had anticipated.
Russia's rate of advance has been slow, to put it mildly. In the best-case scenario, according to data from open-source intelligence outfit Deep State, Russia has managed to seize 672 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory since the start of spring. That falls well short of the already meager 827 square kilometers taken during the same period in 2025, as reported by the Kyiv Independent. And that is the most favorable picture available for Russia. Other reports point out that Russia is actually losing ground, even where it is making gains. A May analysis by the Institute for the Study of War reveals that April marked Russia's first net territorial loss inside Ukraine since Ukraine's summer counteroffensive of 2023. Ukraine was up 120 square kilometers by the end of April, a situation Putin never imagined he would have had to face in what was supposed to be a glorious spring. Ukrainian counterattacks in the south and southeast have hit Russia hard and are a major reason why Ukraine is gaining ground when it is Russia that is supposed to be advancing.
Those counteroffensives derailed Putin's plans for the Zaporizhia region. Russia's push towards Sloviansk in Donetsk is bogged down, and the first of the fortress belt cities that Russia has come close to reaching, Kostiantynivka, is playing its role as a bulwark to the fullest, with Putin's troops dying in massive numbers for every street they manage to take. Putin is being pushed ever closer to making one of the two choices he has always sought to avoid. But behind the slow territorial advances lie two deeper problems that make that choice increasingly inevitable: Ukraine's growing technological advantage and the sheer scale of losses being suffered by the Russian military. Let's start with the casualties. There have been a great many of them over these past few months. The attrition that Russia believed it could absorb thanks to its numerical superiority is genuinely beginning to weigh on its forces. Ukraine's drone-infested kill zones are doing their job and have fundamentally transformed the 2026 spring offensive.
With its FPV drones, Ukraine is capable of striking anything that moves within a few kilometers of the front, at a cost of roughly 10% of what it takes to fire a single artillery shell against a static position.
A complete paradigm shift has taken place in the Ukraine war, and you will understand why that matters so much if you stay with us. For now, the results are what count. Several outlets, including the Kyiv Independent and Politico, report that drones are now responsible for up to 80% of casualties on the battlefield. Some estimates put the figure even higher. In a report highlighting Russia's record casualty rate for March, Al Jazeera stated that 96% of the 35,351 Russian casualties confirmed by Ukraine were recorded by drones, with the remainder attributable to small arms fire and artillery. Add to that the toll drones are taking on Russian military hardware, thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, and air defense systems destroyed, and you arrive at a reality Putin is being forced to accept. Each passing year sees the Russian offensive weaken as Ukrainian defenses grow stronger.
Returning to March's enormous human toll, it is far from an isolated case for Putin's forces. Ukraine repeated the feat in April, with the country's Ministry of Defense claiming 35,203 Russians confirmed killed or wounded for the month. It is worth noting that April has one fewer day than March, meaning it was virtually certain that Ukraine would have reached the roughly 150 additional casualties needed to match its March figures, had that extra day existed. A pattern is emerging, and it bodes nothing good for Putin. Each month, more Russian soldiers are being killed or wounded than ever before, and these casualty figures are being recorded in the middle of a spring offensive that was supposed to be delivering vast swaths of territory to Russia. And the bad news does not stop there on the casualties front. As staggering as Russia's casualty rate has been this spring, the real problem for Putin is this. The vast majority of the 35,000 plus soldiers lost each month are not coming back. That is what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated, declaring on March 10 that Russia's killed to wounded ratio was skewed far too heavily toward the killed. Out of 100% of losses, 62% are killed and 38% are wounded, Zelensky revealed. A ratio dangerously close to 2 to 1 in favor of death over injury. And not all of the wounded can return to the front. If a Russian soldier loses a leg, he will not be of much use on the front line. The odds are therefore that more than 2/3 of Russia's losses, possibly approaching 3/4, involve soldiers who will never fight again, even as Russia does everything it can to conceal this. Soldiers in Putin's military have a habit of going missing rather than being officially confirmed as dead. Russian independent media itself reveals the scale of the carnage. In a May 9 report, Meduza and Mediazona combined their data to establish that 352,000 Russian men between the ages of 18 and 59 have been killed since the start of the war in Ukraine. Those deaths were confirmed through checks of Russia's probate registry, along with examinations of verified death databases compiled by organizations such as BBC Russia. The real death toll is in all likelihood significantly higher. And the news gets worse still. Russian recruitment is on the verge of failing to keep pace with the scale of men Putin is throwing into the Ukrainian meat grinder. On May 4th, United 24 Media reported that April marked the 5th consecutive month in which Russia had failed to recruit enough volunteers to make up for the losses it has suffered in Ukraine. That means 5 straight months of Russia's army gradually shrinking, which also hints at one of the 2 terrible choices Putin will be forced to make. Militarny also examined Russian recruitment in mid-April, and the figures it found were no more encouraging for Putin. Its data shows that Russia recruited around 800 soldiers per day during the first quarter of 2026, compared to between 1,000 and 1,200 per day during the same period in 2025. A drop of 20% or more in recruitment is the last thing Putin needs to see when the spring offensive is already generating record casualties. And Ukraine is only going to make all of these problems worse for Russia. How? The second major problem we mentioned earlier is that Ukraine is building on what it has already achieved by extending its lead in the technological war against Russia. But before we go further, you are watching The Military Show, and there is plenty more where this came from. If this channel is giving you valuable insight, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss one of our videos.
Ukraine has always been the innovator of the two nations involved in this conflict. But since Mikhailo Fedorov's rise to the position of defense minister, Ukraine has taken an even more decisively tech-driven approach to the battle against Russia. The data-centered thinking and modern management philosophy that Fedorov champions are feeding into a deep restructuring of Ukraine's defense ministry and its military. This tech enthusiast is relentless about optimizing everything he touches. And that is precisely what Ukraine desperately needs as the country grapples with a staggering debt of around $213 billion caused by Putin's invasion. Fedorov's guiding principle is to extract maximum output from minimum resources, and the transformation he has already brought to Ukraine's military should not be underestimated. In his previous role as Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation, Fedorov spearheaded the introduction of the Delta Situational Awareness System, which allows Ukrainian soldiers to share videos and information from across the entire battlefield. That system is what Ukraine now uses to verify its casualty figures. Every FPV drone strike against Russia is recorded, uploaded, and counted to give Ukraine an accurate picture of the damage it is inflicting on the ground. Fedorov is also seen as a vital counterweight to what the Kyiv Independent describes as the Soviet-minded commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky. Together, they are working to deliver the best of the old and the new to Ukraine's military. The effects are plain to see in the technological advantage Ukraine has developed.
On the communications front, Fedorov scored his first major win as defense minister when he successfully negotiated with SpaceX to shut down the illicit Starlink terminals Russia had been using for years inside Ukraine. Chaos ensued all along the Russian front line, contributing heavily to the Ukrainian counterattacks and the massive casualty counts we are now witnessing. Furthermore, as United 24 media reported on May 10, the loss of Starlink has had a clear impact on Russia's drone strategy. Putin had an entire Black Sea campaign in place, preparing to launch a naval drone offensive against Ukraine to counter Ukraine's crippling of the Black Sea fleet. Prototypes had already been produced by mid-2025, and 2026 was meant to be the year Russia began deploying its naval drones in large numbers. The Starlink shutdown brought all of that to an abrupt halt. Ukraine's technological supremacy still rules the waters of the Black Sea. The growing focus on technology has also aided Ukraine enormously on the defensive front. The introduction of cheap interceptor drones into Ukraine's layered air defenses is reducing the effectiveness of Russia's Shahed-type drones. Ground robotic systems are being deployed all along the front lines.
According to the Center for European Policy Analysis, those robots could reduce Ukraine's frontline infantry requirements by 30% by the end of 2026, and perhaps as much as 80% in the future. These robots are increasingly vital to Ukraine's logistics, and some are even being fitted with machine guns to serve as offensive weapons. Then there is artificial intelligence. Ukraine is pulling so far ahead of Russia in that area that it is almost staggering. Entire swarms of autonomous drones are now being unleashed on the battlefield, each capable of identifying, tracking, and destroying targets with minimal human intervention. Ukraine has also partnered with the United Kingdom, which is funding an AI center of excellence to drive further development of cutting-edge drones capable of crippling Russia. As the kill zones deepen and the technology advances, Ukraine is building momentum across the battlefield. And it is that momentum, combined with Russia's apparent inability to respond to it, that brings us back to the two choices now sitting in front of Putin, neither of which leads to a Russian victory.
Choice number 1, mobilization. The one advantage Russia still holds over Ukraine is its far larger pool of manpower. Russia's population is roughly 4 times the size of Ukraine's, but the reason that has not been as decisive a factor as it could have been is that Putin has been deeply reluctant to mobilize for most of the conflict. Bear in mind that we are talking about a man who still refers to this war as a special military operation 4 years and more than 1.3 million casualties later. Mobilization has long been off the table because Putin knows that mobilizing means breaking the social contract that has been at the heart of his grip on power. Putin has spent a quarter of a century positioning himself as the strongman capable of delivering the stability Russia needs. Placing the country on a full war footing grinds that contract to dust.
It amounts to telling the Russian people that he was wrong and that Russia cannot overwhelm Ukraine with the already enormous resources it has committed. More is needed. And that is where the defeat comes in. As the Institute for the Study of War points out, Putin lives in fear of the societal backlash that full mobilization would deliver to his regime. That backlash could prove worse than the one faced by the former Soviet Union in the aftermath of its disastrous invasion of Afghanistan.
That decade-long conflict cost Russia around 15,000 casualties. Putin's campaign in Ukraine is hitting those numbers in less than half a day, which is a major reason why mobilization is becoming increasingly unavoidable. Putin is doing everything he can to avoid it, which would place him in the tradition of the czars of old, who sent hundreds of thousands of Russians to their deaths in their wars. Never mind the fact that Putin has already done exactly that. With Russia's leader, everything comes down to narrative, and mobilization would amount to admitting that the special military operation has become the war he long promised his people it would never become. Revolution may not come immediately in the wake of a Russian mobilization, but Putin would lose, because he would have shattered the already crumbling foundations of his power base. If Russia mobilizes to deal with Ukraine, Putin could end up laying the groundwork for his own downfall, as the Russian people and the country's elite begin looking for ways to bring his reign to an end. Then there is the second option, winding down the entire war through a peace agreement. Putin has been dropping hints that this is precisely what he is looking for in the aftermath of.
And though he tinged all of it with the usual Russian rhetoric about Ukraine failing to cooperate and the West being out to get Russia, the very fact that he openly spoke about peace and an end to the conflict on a day that is supposed to mark Russian military might speaks volumes. Putin is looking for a way out. And of the two options, this is the one Ukraine would prefer, where mobilization means Putin loses but can still send hundreds of thousands more men into Ukraine. Peace means Ukraine avoids further destruction, and Putin instead breaks his promise to take Ukraine, rather than the social contract he holds with the Russian people. Putin's problem here is that Ukraine is not going to accept peace on the terms he wants. The Donbas is not going to be handed over to Russia. Instead, Ukraine will demand that Russia abandon its ambitions to seize Ukrainian territory, and it will want to keep the military it has built, which has become one of the most effective fighting forces in the world. One of the reasons Putin gave for invading Ukraine was that he wanted to stop the country from growing more powerful. Choosing the second option means not only that he fails in that goal, but that he has to accept that he has created a version of Ukraine far stronger than even he could have imagined. There are some, perhaps including Putin himself, who believe it is impossible for Russia to accept peace on any terms that do not deliver at least a portion of Ukraine. If no territory is annexed after 4 years of fighting, Putin is the man responsible for the slaughter of an entire generation of Russian men for nothing.
What we have not covered in this video is the complete economic turmoil that Putin's invasion has created inside Russia and the pressure it is placing on him. But do not worry, we have a video that explains all of it. Watch it if you want to learn more about the ticking time bomb that is the Russian economy, and why it is making Putin panic. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more of our deep dives into the hidden underbelly of Putin's rule and his many failures in Ukraine.
surestimé et en tout cas impossible à vérifier. 300 000 soldats, 36 000 chars, 1000 avions et 80 navires de guerre sont mobilisés.
Simuler des combats en vue d'un débarquement sur les côtes de la mer du Japon, il s'agit d'une partie des exercices de Vostok 2018 les plus importants jamais organisés dans l'histoire de la Russie. Les médias en ont conclu et l'ont écrit dans leur titre que la Russie ne laisserait personne l'attaquer.
Ces grandes manœuvres se déroulent jusqu'à lundi prochain dans l'extrême-orient russe, près de Vladivostok, et concernent aussi bien l'armée de terre que l'armée de l'air ou la marine.
Les manœuvres ont lieu dans divers théâtres d'opérations militaires, dans différentes zones climatiques, différents fuseaux horaires, et elles sont menées par des troupes nombreuses ou parfois par de petites unités.
Montrer au monde la puissance de l'armée russe, c'est tout sauf anodin alors que le Kremlin est régulièrement pointé du doigt dans le conflit syrien, pour l'annexion de la Crimée et pour des soupçons d'empoisonnement au Novichok ou d'ingérence dans les élections américaines.